that. Well, joining me now is the president of Harris Decima, Bruce Anderson. Bruce, good to see you.
Good to see you, Don.
And you know how they feel about it because you had a poll, some of the numbers we saw last week about a carbon tax. I noticed in the questions you never actually said the words carbon tax, but you were basically talking about a carbon tax. Is that right?
Well, actually, in one particular instance, we did mention carbon
Okay.
tax specifically, and we found that 61% of Canadians said that they supported it, which was the least enthusiasm that they showed for any of the four alternatives that we tested. So there's some merit in the idea as voters see it, but that's not the idea that they're most enthusiastic about.
Okay, let's look at that first number, the 61% number, because there it is, carbon tax. Okay, yeah, carbon tax on emissions, and 61% in favor and 32% opposed, even though 61% to me seems like a significant number. Did it to you when you saw that? Because people talk about it like it's sort of the plague. Oh, we can't have a carbon tax.
Well, people around some parts of politics talk about it like it's the plague, but the underlying tendencies have been there for some time. Canadians feel that we need to do more to reverse the negative impacts that we've been having on the environment. Carbon tax as one possible part of a solution set appeals to a fair number of people because they feel so strongly that we need to relieve the pressures on the environment. But more people are preoccupied with things like how much garbage we produce, how much water we waste, how much electricity we waste. And fossil fuels is a part of that framework, but it's not the only part. In fact, climate change isn't the only issue that they're worried about.
Okay, so let's look at then the numbers for the next question, which includes some of those other things in it, and incentives and investments. What does that mean?
Well, when we take the idea of a carbon tax and then we specifically say, and the money that would be raised by it would be put into investments in things that help improve our environment over the long term, the number 61 jumps to 70% just by describing where that money would go and what the environmental benefit would be.
And but again, it's sort of, they're not quite sure how it would work, or they don't know, or did you explain that to them? How'd that
No,
play out?
when it comes to a carbon tax, first of all, carbon is a narrow technical term. Not a lot of people relate to it. Tax is a broad term that not a lot of people like. So neither of those words are very good starting points in political context.
Right.
But people get some idea that this is related to the broad issue of climate change and we should be doing more to condition behavior. And so they accept it at a certain level, 61%. Better still if they think that the money raised is going to affect investments. But bear in mind that what people like about this idea, if they like it at all, is the idea that it changes behavior, not that it raises money. In other words, they would rather nobody paid a carbon tax because everybody started to change their behavior. And that's where I think the politics gets a little bit wonky sometimes.
Well, but I guess people understand unless there's some incentive, they're not going to change behavior because we're already behaving the way we think we'd like to behave.
Well, they do. And one of the problems, though, with carbon tax at this particular moment in time is that if for people to believe that another couple of cents on a gallon of gasoline is really going to change behavior, they have to deny the fact that the increases in price that we've seen for so long have had any impact on behavior. Either that behavior is already starting to change, or this incremental tax probably isn't going to have that much impact. So I think that the best politics here lies in something that's more broadly defined around environmental behaviors, a system of rewards and penalties with some investments in new environmental technologies.
Okay, and you had a question that sort of goes to that as well. So let's look at what came out of that. Environmental usage charge, above average users. Well, let's talk about that first because that actually gets to back down 73% to 20% opposed. How would that work?
Well, what we described for people here was the idea that a charge would be levied on people who perform really at an egregious level, so that you set an example of average usage for a household of water, electricity, fossil fuels, and the amount of garbage that they produce, and that people who are above that norm get penalized, that there's some sort of environmental usage charge. So some might look at that and say that's a cousin or a sister of a carbon tax, and perhaps it is in some respects. But that idea gets significantly more upside. In fact, you saw the 73-20, but the number of strong supporters of that idea are 30%. The number of strong opponents are 5. So you've got a 6-to-1 ratio. And we tend to look at this and say, both the Conservatives and the Liberals need a breakout strategy here. They're both mired in this 30 to 35% range. All things taken into account, this may be the most obvious breakout opportunity for the Liberals if they can get the policy right and if they can communicate it well.
Okay, so one other question you had there, let's take a look at that. And environmental tax refund. Support for that, well, a tax refund sounds like a good plan, right? So 80% like that, only 16% oppose. But how would that work?
Well, really, this is combining the idea of an environmental usage charge against those who are egregious in their behavior, and some sort of an environmental reward for those who either already have or will at some point in the future change their behavior for the better. You put it all together, Don, and I think what these numbers are telling us is that a carbon tax is a technical, narrow definition of an idea that in its broadest implications people really do like in Canada. The better version of the idea might be one that relates to things like water, garbage, electricity, as well as fossil fuels, and has a system of rewards and penalties, maybe not configured just like a tax on carbon so that everybody doesn't get hit the same way regardless of how they behaved up till now. And obviously some investment in environmental infrastructure and technology as well.
But just in one final thought, the last two, you know, measuring how much garbage and so forth, or how do you claim for your tax rebate, that would be pretty complicated, it seems to me.
I think that's right. I think that there's a level of complexity in all of these ideas that probably hasn't been fully explored yet. It's certainly not fully digested by the public. All we're really doing is saying the politics of a 61% idea versus an 80% idea, you know, if you can find the policy solutions that hit closer to that 80%, you're